Hey everyone, I'm your host Cadence, and welcome back to another episode of Project Honesty. This is a podcast by a young adult, for young adults, to acquire unfiltered advice and bold opinions, as well as take deep dives into the issues shaping our world. We'll challenge ideas, explore new perspectives, and have fun while navigating the ups and downs of life. This is Project Honesty, where truth meets curiosity and every conversation matters. Last episode was a bonus episode called Celebrating National Indigenous Peoples Day. Tune into this bonus episode here on Project Honesty, as today marks today, meaning a couple days ago, Canada's National Indigenous Peoples Day. In this episode, we discuss the history and creation of this day, why it is so important to recognize and celebrate, as well as learn some ways a non-Indigenous person like myself can take positive steps towards reconciliation and reconciliation. And we talk about the difference between the two in that episode. That is available on Spotify and YouTube like always. I'm sorry that this original topic was supposed to come out in May. It definitely didn't come out in May. It was supposed to May. Yeah, it was supposed to come out in May. Definitely didn't come out in May. So some of this is written a while ago. I did update a lot of it, and made it a little bit longer. This episode, for some reason, always was the one where either A, I had to delay it because of personal reasons, or B, I had to delay it because my technology wasn't working. I am now finally being able to make this episode, so it's been a while, but we're here, we're making it, it's gonna be great. So basically today's topic is taking a look at what's going on in the Canadian government, going over what has happened since the election, which was back in April, and the plans and policies moving forward into 2025 and beyond. So I kind of shortened the election section in here because the election was so long ago, and so I feel like I don't have to focus on it as much. If you have not been living under a rock, you would know Mark Carney of the Liberal Party has officially become our Prime Minister. Again, technically, he's a prime minister because he took over for Justin Trudeau when he resigned. The Liberals did not gain a majority government by 2 seats. So, based on Canada's first past the post system, which I am not going to explain because that is a really long system to try to explain, and I don't want to put it in here. Google first past the post if you don't know what that is. But basically, with a government system like that, a majority government needs 172 seats in the House. And the Liberals got 170. So they are just 2 seats short of a majority. Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party, lost his seat in the House during this election, as well as Jagmeet Singh of the NDP party. He also lost his seat and has actually totally decided to resign as the new Democratic Party leader. And compared to the last federal election, both the Liberal and Conservative Party have grown significant percentage points by gaining voters, with the Liberals at 11.1% and the Conservatives at 7.6%. This comes at a cost of parties that are smaller, that grasp nicher audiences like the New Democratic Party, as they have fallen 11.5 percentage points in voters this term. Talking a little bit about voter data, this data covers voter turnout from the years of 2004 to 2025. This federal election has had the highest voter turnout since 2015. Total voter turnout across the country, and I'm going to say the number and it's going to sound low, but this is one of the highest numbers we have seen. It's at 69%. That's not a lot of people, but compared to some years, that is an insane number when comparing data from 2004. The early voters casting their ballots this time around was also record-breaking, with around 7 million Canadians registering their vote early. So yeah, that's kind of just stuff that happened with the election. It's kind of crazy seeing Pierre Poilievre lose his seat. I'm also not upset about that. Being totally honest. I'm also seeing that those election results makes me excited to see what is next for the New Democratic Party, as well as smaller parties like the Green Party. If you've ever taken a who should I vote for quiz, we had to do it in school. Mine is either New Democrats or Green Party. that shouldn't shock any of you. And if it does, hi, welcome. But yeah, so that's kind of the election and voter data that I wanted to add in here. Now I want to talk about Mark Carney. The information that I gathered on him was from the BBC and the Canadian government websites. So Mark Carney is 60 years old, and he was born in Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, yet he was raised in Edmonton, and he is now officially the 24th Prime Minister of Canada. His educational background is quite impressive. He has a Bachelor of Economics from Harvard, which he got an athletic scholarship for in 1988, and then he proceeded to get his Master's of Economics in 1993 and PhD in Economics in 1995 from Oxford University. Before becoming Prime Minister, Carney left the private financial sector in 2003 and began as Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada, where he kind of started his career being involved in the government when it comes to economical things. In 2007, right before the global market crash, Canada was heading into a deep recession. Mark Carney was appointed Governor of the Bank of Canada, and many Canadians credit Carney for saving Canada from the worst part of the recession the country could have seen. This stance that Mark Carney protected Canadians during the 2008 recession is highly controversial, especially amongst us in Western Canada, but as a whole, Western Canada always has a problem with Ottawa, so that doesn't surprise me. Carney was the second youngest person to ever hold this title in the Bank of Canada, and he held this title from 2013 to 2020. Following this, he became the governor of the Bank of England, and this again is controversial with people overseas who experienced the Brexit crisis. Carney's main campaign focuses and promises to all Canadians is that he's going to focus on growing the country of Canada, create higher paying jobs, putting more money in Canadian pockets, and making Canada more secure. On his campaign website, it goes into 3 different points. It's defending Canadian sovereignty, uniting all Canadians together, and building the strongest economy in the G7. So now we're going to take a deeper dive and closer look into the 2025 Liberal campaign and analyze some of the policies, issues, and relations of the Liberals and some of the strategies they're taking moving forward. And I've added a section at the end into how Carney is going to handle or will handle US-Canada relations and economics. So the main policies of the Liberals are focused on uniting, security, protecting, and building. So let's kind of see how these match up to Mark Carney's promises. So when it comes to economy, now I have taken this from their campaign trail. I have broken it down into smaller sections so it's easier, and I've kind of pulled information that I think is most relevant. Obviously, if you would like to go see the entire campaign policies and promises, go look at it on the website. I don't know what you look up. Just look up Liberal 2025 federal election campaign. I don't know. Look up that and you're going to find the hundreds of policies and promises, but I've just pulled a few that we can discuss and talk about. So first, I wanted to talk about his economic policies. One of his biggest focuses is breaking down interprovincial trade barriers, which creates more domestic free trade, and he plans to implement this by Canada Day. I'm recording this on June 24th. That is a pretty big promise, but we have yet to see if that promise will be fulfilled. He's also going to make credentials for certain professions recognized equally across all provinces, so that expands the job market for Canadians. That is a pretty big job barrier in this country, I think, because sometimes if you're certified in something in Nova Scotia, it doesn't necessarily mean you can get that same job here in Alberta. So it just depends what profession. It's mostly trades, but making that so that all credentials can count will make it easier, alleviate some of the stress of trying to find a job. There's also going to be big investments in infrastructure that connects Canadians to Canadians. So, for example, high-speed rail between cities such as Windsor and Quebec City. I also know in my province they've talked about doing it between Calgary and Edmonton. that is a choice. I feel like people would use it for sure, but I don't know how much that investment would be. I don't know. It'd be a lot of tax dollars. That's all I know. There's also going to be a $5 billion trade diversification corridors fund. So this includes ports, railways, airports, highways, and other trade enabling infrastructure. So further investing in freeing domestic trade as well as international trade amid this trade war that we are currently in with the US. And then there's also going to be an advancement in nation-building infrastructure projects through the recently doubled Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program, which went from $5 billion to $10 billion. So things, again, with the point of connecting Canadians to Canadians, but also investing in things that are Canadian-made and support Canadians and people in this country. There's also, the reason I didn't add many to this first economic section is because I talk a lot more about economics when it comes to US and Canada trade relations, so we'll get more into that in a bit. Now I want to talk about some of the social policies. Now this is broken down into like 3 sections. So overall, there's a strong focus on protecting Canadian values and kind of uniting all of us under the umbrella of Canada. Things like protecting public health care, reinstating the fact that Canadian public health care is a right. Even on the campaign website, it says that in the US, the healthcare system is like a business, but the Canadian public healthcare system is a right. So kind of reinstating that, as well as supporting programs like dental care and pharmacare, and overall modernizing our healthcare system. This also means providing greater access to mental health services, specifically for young people. That comes up again in our Young Canadian section. We'll just be in a second. There's a big focus I noticed when analyzing his campaign policies about supporting families and providing better, more affordable access to daycare so that parents can work. There's also a lot of educational focuses, so making the National School Food Program a permanent structure rather than a temporary one that could be changed. There's also a focus on environmental protection, so launching things like the Canadian Nature Protection Fund and things that make sure Parks Canada is better equipped for natural disasters, which, if you know that we have forest fires every year. Right now, we just had a rock slide in Bow Falls in Banff National Park. So kind of things... Make sure we have enough funding and infrastructure to support us through times like that. The next section I added in here, which I found really interesting that I've never necessarily seen on a campaign trail for a federal party, is acknowledging young Canadians. Now, I want to bring up the point that Pierre Poilievre saying that my biological clock is running out isn't trying to support me. I don't find that in any way, shape, or form a way to support me, because the focus right now in this economy for a lot of people is not having kids. It's about getting a roof over the head, gas in their car, paying their insurance, and making sure they can eat like a couple times a day. That's kind of the focus. So telling me my biological clock is running out isn't necessarily making me feel supported as someone who's a young Canadian. So when it comes to young Canadians, providing funding and expanding mandates where appropriate for the Student Work Placement Program, the Youth Employment and Skills Strategy, the YES program, which we've talked about in the Youth Employment episode, and then Canada Summer Jobs, as well as the Canadian Service Corps, and continuing to uphold the removal of interest on Canadian student loans and Canadian apprentice loans. There's also a focus on making generational housing investments to double the pace of construction and drive down the cost of homes, rent, and mortgage payments. The high cost of housing has become a barrier to a lot of young Canadians hoping to expand. For me, like, I kind of joke about it, but it's like, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to afford a home, because I either have to make $150,000 a year to afford a home in this country, or live in my mom's basement till I'm 30. And, there's one option that sounds a little bit better, but it's hard to get there with this place that we are right now. There's also a new thing that I found really cool, is the Canada Strong Pass. It's been in the news a little bit recently, especially on social media. It's so that young Canadians can discover Canada this summer and make it more affordable. So I think, like, I forget the age groups, but kids under 17 are able to see museums for free. I don't necessarily understand the park pass thing, but I'm pretty sure the Canada Strong Pass makes it so that youth and people that are like 19 to 24 or 18 to 24 get like cheaper or free park passes, so that it's more accessible to go see what we have in our incredible backyard that is the Canadian Rockies. And I'm looking into it because I backpack and I hike, and it's something from the government that I can actually take advantage of. So I'm looking into that very soon. And there's also a strong focus, again, with healthcare, is providing 100,000 young people a year or more with mental health care by establishing a permanent youth mental health fund. As someone who's dabbled in therapy and a bunch of different ways to deal with her mental health, this is a very amazing thing to hear, that the federal government actually is writing things that now focus on youth mental health. I think that's really important, and I don't see it a lot in a lot of these campaigns, and I think that is a very important thing that I was very happy to see, and that's why I pulled it out to talk about it, because I think that's incredible. There's a lot of focus on the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, so like all prime ministers should, there's a big focus on upholding the rights that are in the Charter and enabling more Canadians to stand up and affirm their Charter rights. And a point that kind of stuck out to me here is they said building a Canada where everyone has a fair shot, feels a sense of belonging, and contributes to our shared future by reshaping systems to better reflect and support all Canadians, and make sure that no matter your heritage or identity, you can fully participate in Canada. I think that's a really important part, focusing again on equity, inclusivity, and a little bit of equality, but equity is more so the thing because some people need different things than others. And yeah, I think it's good to point out the fact that Canadians will still be empowered in our charter rights. And as someone from Alberta, I know a lot of people should be happy to hear that. They're not, because a lot of people in Alberta and Western Canada, for that matter, don't like the Liberal Party. That's reasonable. I don't really either, but, you know, I kind of have to sometimes when it comes down to the wire. So, I like that they pointed that out. Again, with Charter of Rights and Freedoms, so there's focus on confronting systematic barriers and specifically creating more opportunities for Indigenous people, Black Canadians, as well as other racialized or marginalized communities. And there's also make funding permanent for the LGBTQIA plus community capacity fund to support community organizations and networks that protect rights and advance equality across Canada. As someone who's openly gay, that's nice to hear, because, you know, that is something, yes, there's a lot of equality in this world, but there's a lot of places where my sexuality and the way the people I choose to love is still not acceptable in any way, shape, or form. So that's really nice to hear. There's also going to be a review and reform of the process to apply for the disability tax credit, along with guaranteeing equal access to justice for people with disabilities by developing a disability justice framework to address the long-standing inequities for people with disabilities. The next section is arguably one of the most important sections to me, because I'm a woman who plans to live most of her life in Canada for the most part. So we're going to make the Sexual and Reproductive Health Fund program permanent so that there always will be funding for abortion care in Canada. That is really incredible to see. I know that there are some Americans that have to go here to get the health care that they deserve. Again, abortion is health care. You can't fight me on that, because it's true. Abortion is healthcare. It's necessary. And I love to see that our federal government is taking that into account. There's also a focus on establishing new in vitro fertilization programs that provides up to $20,000 for a single standard cycle of IVF treatment. If you don't know anything about IVF and are not aware of what IVF is, it's a very, very, very incredibly expensive treatment for people who can't naturally have a pregnancy, and IVF is out of a lot of people's reach, and that can limit people from having kids at all. And if that's a dream and your fertility is stopping you, it sucks. There also, one part that really stuck out to me under the women's rights section is addressing the under-researched area of postpartum maternal health by investing in research into postpartum maternal health and funding studies and track outcomes, disparities and service gaps, and inform future investments so that women can get better care after giving birth. This is what we've been needing. The entire reproductive system and care in general for a woman is so under-researched and misunderstood, and our bodies are still incredibly misunderstood. There's books, there's so many things that explain how incredibly misunderstood our bodies are. And again, seeing the federal government take a stance in that is really eye-opening. And so again, this part really stuck out to me, is investing in increased collection of data to help address women's health gaps in Canada. So particularly in understudied areas of menopause, endometriosis, maternal mortality and morbidity, stillbirth, and prenatal health. Oh my gosh, as someone who is pretty confident that she has PCOS, this is insane because so much is not told to women about endometriosis, PCOS, how to take care of themselves while pregnant. It's insane. Again, because of no funding, under-researched, no active studies, and nobody giving a damn. So now it's nice to see somebody at least have an idea of what it means to give a damn about women and women's rights. There's also going to be work to end gender-based violence, so continuing investments in the National Action Plan to end gender-based violence, supporting victims, supporting Indigenous-led approaches will be prioritized in this partnership. And so it says right at the bottom of the section, keeping Canada safe means keeping every Canadian safe, no matter who they are or where they live. That is incredibly important. When it comes to women's prosperity, there's a chance and opportunity and policies hopefully being implemented to unlock new economic opportunities for women by increasing support for the Women's Economic and Leadership Opportunities Fund. This fund basically invests in projects that promote women's economic security and prosperity, and our economy wouldn't work without women. Women are necessary and women deserve recognition. So I love to see that. And then there's also going back to childcare and affordable childcare, is protecting and strengthening that care in Canada, because that's a part of protecting women's rights. As most of the time, the moms are the primary caregivers to their children, and single moms especially tend to struggle more financially, as well as struggling with finding affordable childcare. So that is a very important policy that I really like to see develop throughout the next couple years. And then there's also Indigenous issues. So throughout their entire campaign, the Liberals have put a great emphasis and importance to the fact that the Canadian federal government has a responsibility to reconnect, reconcile, and learn from Indigenous communities all around Canada, highlighting past mistakes and highlighting the importance of valuing and uplifting Indigenous communities, which strives for forward movement in the government's relationship with Indigenous communities through reconciliation and action. So partnering with Indigenous communities on implementing and upholding treaty rights and rights to self-determination, upholding documents like the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, as well as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to action. If you listened to last episode, I talked about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to actions. I believe there's 96, and they're linked in the description of that episode. It is long, but it's a really amazing read to see what this commission has to say. There's also a focus on protecting K-12 education on reserve and protecting Indigenous language. There's also advancing Indigenous-led plans that work towards self-determination, which is something promised in the Indian Act by the Crown, by the Canadian government, that, surprise, literally has never happened. So, it's nice to see policies around self-determination, considering the fact that none of these were ever upheld, and that's not okay. And then there's also a plan to launch a new Indigenous Pathways to Prosperity Skills and Training Fund, which will help Indigenous people, especially youth, find work opportunity and work skills to hopefully further their economic opportunities. And so those are kind of some of the short form explanations of social, economic, and human rights policies. The next one is really, really important, and it's about political and national security. This is what a lot of Canadians were focused on during this election, due to the ongoing trade wars between Canada and the United States, as well as other international conflicts that may affect us in the future. So when talking about the Canadian Armed Forces, there's a focus on rebuilding, rearming, and investing. So getting Canadian Armed Forces members a pay raise, investing in early warning protection, investing in new planes, icebreakers, and people to secure Canada's coastlines and Arctic. There's a big focus on Arctic sovereignty, especially in our giant archipelago that needs to be protected. That's so huge. Investing in new air and underwater drones, boosting maritime surveillance operations, as well as boosting Canada's domestic defense industries. There's a focus when talking about like buying new planes and icebreakers and all this other stuff. There was a focus on making sure that it was mostly Canadian made so that we are benefiting from our own service. When talking about the Arctic, there's working closely with Arctic and Northern Indigenous leaderships as partners in defense and security investments that respect their rights, incorporate the traditional knowledge that Indigenous communities in the Arctic have, and ensure that community priorities are reflected, especially on targeted investments in dual-use infrastructure such as airstrips and other critical infrastructure to the Canadian government and army. That is something we haven't really seen. Arctic sovereignty is such a hot topic in Canada because our Arctic is sacred to countless Indigenous communities, but at the same time, the Canadian federal government wants to protect our Canadian sovereignty as a whole, and we can't do that without having discussions with Indigenous leaders first. That is something, again, with the Liberal Party that I haven't really seen before, is that they are prioritizing the conversations with Indigenous communities to ensure that their policies are in collaboration rather than just telling them what's going on. And that's something we don't see often. And it's like turning a new page, and I'm here for it. There's also a focus and an importance for strengthening the presence of the Canadian Armed Forces in the Arctic to protect the sovereignty of our land, air, and sea, including a network of deep water ports that will allow us to protect Northwest Passage year-round. The Northwest Passage is a trade route, very important, and I'm very glad Canada is focusing on protecting that, because that has a lot to do with our economy, and we need that. Moving forward to detect and deter early warning radar coverage of threats to the Arctic by working with partners in Australia to develop advanced over-the-horizon radar. This will also deepen our defense and trade ties with Australia. Canada, as a whole, with their relationship to Australia, because we're under the Commonwealth, we're pretty close as countries, and so seeing us work together in collaboration for national security, we love to see it. And along with investing in people in the Arctic, there's going to be further investments in northern infrastructure to further protect and defend northern sovereignty. Now we're going to move into the section where we talk about how is Carney approaching US-Canada relations amidst this gigantic, never-seen-before trade war, and just kind of US-Canada relations in general. From the very beginning, even prior to him being elected officially as Prime Minister, Mark Carney has made it clear to everyone, including Donald Trump himself, that Canada is not for sale. He's said it to media at press conferences in the Oval Office with Trump. It's reinstated in his campaign policies, specifically around economics. Like, there's that one clip of him in the Oval Office. What's that room? It's like the living room or whatever. And he's like, Canada is not for sale. Or he said, like, never, never to something Trump said about buying Canada. And this was one of the key things that drove Canadians out to vote in the first place, because we need and wanted a leader who is going to stand for and protect Canadian sovereignty. Carney's approach for now is to remain friendly, but he has taken no prisoners when completely denying and refusing Trump's even mere suggestion around Canada being for sale. He has made it clear Canada is not for sale. And I think Canadians have made that clear as well. Canada isn't for sale. There's no apologies around that. Carney's economic responses to Trump have kind of varied. I know that there's upcoming tariffs to Trump as a kind of defensive response. But overall, responding to existing U.S. tariffs on our economy for as long as is necessary, while also ensuring that we are safeguarding Canadian industries from the threat of trade diversion. So every dollar raised from these tariffs will support Canadian workers and businesses affected by this trade war. There's a lot of industries that are being affected by this trade war that Trump is, first of all, a fucking idiot for thinking that his country can self-sustain that. Yes, they are one of the biggest economies in the world, but you need trade. There's a video, I should link it. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it because I don't know what it's called, but it's basically like, let's make a car. Well, okay, the engine gets put in Mexico, then the car gets shipped to Canada for something, then it needs parts from the US, so it goes to the US, then it goes back to Mexico, then it goes to the US, then it goes to Canada, then it goes to the US, then it comes back to Canada, and the car's fucking put together. But without being able to freely trade with each other, the car will never be built. So, kind of not further aggravating the Trump administration when it comes to tariffs, but responding as we need to accordingly. There's a project to create a $2 billion strategic response fund to boost our auto sector's competitiveness, protecting manufacturing jobs, especially for workers, and again, supporting workers to upskill their expertise in this industry and build a fortified Canadian supply chain from raw materials to finished vehicles. That is hard, but it's doable. As long as we find other international trading partners that are willing to help us, that's okay. Again, about the auto industry, is building a quote, all in Canada network for auto manufacturing component parts. With this network, they plan to work with this industry to build more car parts in Canada to limit the amount of those parts crossing the border during production and to attract investment in our own industry. Again, that is a challenging one, but if that is laid out in the campaign policies, maybe we will see that happen. But again, that is hard. As Canadians, I think, up until this trade war, didn't realize how much of the shit that we use and need, like cars and whatever, are not Canadian made. I think this trade war has kind of put into perspective the amount of self-sustainability we need and the amount of self-sustainability we don't have yet. With that, this is also another focus when we talk about Trump and tariffs, is maximizing Canada's steel, aluminum, and critical minerals, from exploration to battery production, to seize this economic opportunity, create higher paying jobs, and build a really strong economy. There are currently, right now, I'm pretty sure there is 125% tariffs No, not for us. I don't think so. No, there's 25% tariffs on our steel and aluminum, I'm pretty sure. Because Trump thinks the US has got that covered. Little does he know, a lot of lumber used in America, along with steel and aluminum, is Canadian. More specifically, like Albertan, which kind of makes me feel good. But yeah. Overall, safeguarding our economy and our values and protecting Canada from attempts to buy up our businesses, our core public health care, intellectual property, critical minerals, and other resources, this will all be safeguarded by strengthening the Investment Canada Act. We will make more transactions reviewable, as well as modernizing standards to capture manipulative transaction models, including by reviewing the potential impacts to Canada's data sovereignty. They also promised to make clear that any transactions involving core infrastructure to our healthcare system, such as long-term care facilities and family health practices, will be subject to stringent review and protection under this Investment Act. So that is kind of how Carney is planning on protecting Canada's economy amidst this trade war. Moving forward, we'll see how our counter tariffs will work out. But yeah, this episode has taken forever, and I'm very sorry that it's been a month that y'all have been waiting for me to talk about this, but I finally talked about it. It's here and it's out, and I'm so very excited for y'all to have listened to this episode. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Project Honesty. You can check us out on social media. Our Instagram is project_honesty24. Our TikTok is project.honesty. And our website is linked in our Instagram bio. We are also available for listening on Spotify and YouTube. And hopefully more platforms coming soon. If you enjoy listening to Project Honesty, share us with friends and family, and you can direct them to the Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, website, or TikTok to help them learn more. Subscribe, follow, and click the bell icon for updates when I post. And remember, the more listeners, the bigger the family.